and they were surrounded by ceramic vessels, and they were wearing red robes. The red in the Inca clothing was often created using hematite or other iron oxides, but upon further inspection of these mummies, it was revealed that their red clothing held something much more dangerous. The dye used for their clothing contained cinnabar, which is a mineral rich in mercury. This was often used in the ancient world as a pigment for makeup, clothing, and paint, but handling it leads to mercury poisoning. What is strange is that researchers believe that the toxicity of cinnabar was known in ancient Peru, so we aren't exactly sure why they used it in the first place, but it's thought that it might have been used as protection against grave robbers. In our number 4 spot today, we have Puma Punku. This site is located in Bolivia, and it boasts a series of stone structures. One of the most notable and remarkable things about this site is how precisely the stones here were cut. It is believed that this site dates back to somewhere around 536 AD, and while it now lay in ruins, it is thought to have once been an incredibly wondrous place filled with things like polished metal plaques, bright ceramics, and a bunch of different fabrics. It isn't quite known exactly what this site was used for entirely, partly because of its age, but also because of the lack of written record and the deterioration that can be seen at the site. Because of the impressive size of the site, as well as the technology that was used to build it, this is a place that many people often say was built by aliens, but it was actually just the Incas. They were incredibly talented craftsmen, and just because we couldn't pull it off today doesn't mean we should take their credit away. In our number 3 spot today, we have Whale Hill. In 2010, in the Atacama Desert in Chile, some road work was being done when the fossils and bones of 40 whales were found among the remains of other marine animals. Remember, this is in the desert and about 40 meters above sea level, so how is this even possible? I feel like I could totally understand like maybe a few fish, but 40 whales, some dolphins, seals, and swordfish? Something strange certainly must have been at play. Like I'm sure many of you are thinking, maybe the remains were from a time when the sea was once there, but unfortunately that too has been debunked. It isn't exactly clear what happened here, but the belief is that these animals may have consumed some kind of toxic plant or algae and somehow ended up washing ashore only to pass away in this location. In our number 2 spot today, we have Sacsayhuaman. This site is located in Cusco, Peru, and it is another fascinating and seemingly impossible stone structure that
It's time for your comeback. Make it count at Purdue Global. Apply now at purdueglobal.edu.
was built by the Incas. This structure was once believed to have been a fortress, but now it is believed it may have actually been used for things like ceremonies. Why this is another incredible creation is because of the fact that we can't quite figure out how it could have been built. The stones in the structure fit together so perfectly that they're able to stay together without anything holding them in place, and they've done so for years and years. This, coupled with how large some of the stones were, is enough to completely stump experts. Despite how well the stones all fit together, apparently they all have different shapes, which has led researchers to believe that the building design was kind of made up as the structure was being built. Imagine that, improvising building a structure, and it lasts for hundreds of years and goes on to stump humanity for a while. I'm just saying, this is pretty cool. It becomes more and more apparent how talented and brilliant the Inca really were. In our number 1 spot today, we have the sacrificial offerings. In 2018, researchers sent some remote-operated robots beneath the ground in Peru at an archaeological site. These robots stumbled on more than anyone ever imagined when they found a network of 35 interlocked underground tunnels dating back 3,000 years. This was already an unbelievable discovery, but it turned dark when inside these tunnels, the team found a bunch of human remains. While finding a mass amount of remains would be a terrifying experience, there were 3 skeletons that stood out from the rest. They specifically stood out because they weren't like the others. They weren't the skeletons of people who had a high social standing, which almost all of the others appeared to be. These remains they found were from people who were sacrificed in rituals. They were able to determine this because of the fact that these bodies were found face down under piles of rocks, which is of course not how people of a high social standing would have been buried at this time. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the vanishing remains. It's been over 30 years since the Titanic wreck was found, and recently scientists have made another startling discovery. As it turns out, the remains of the wreckage don't have much time left. As we speak, they are currently vanishing. The ocean liner, which is over 100 years old, has not only been beaten by the currents of the deep sea, but the main culprit for its deterioration is an iron-hungry bacteria that consumes hundreds of pounds of iron a day. This bacteria, which has been named Halomonas titanicae, is likely going to render the ship completely eroded by 2030. This means that researchers who want to discover more about the Titanic really are racing against time to get down there and see all that they can before the remains are gone, and the story of the Titanic remains just that. In our number 9 spot today, we have portholes. Since the Titanic sunk, people have been trying to figure out exactly how this unsinkable ship sank and how it sank so quickly. A recent study may have found a previously undiscussed scenario that likely contributed to the speed of the sinking ship greatly. On that fateful day, of course, the Titanic grinded to a halt, and at that point, the passengers had no idea why. This led to many of them opening up the portholes in the ship to get a look out in case they could see anything that would be stopping them from continuing on their journey. Many of those who opened the portholes didn't close them after, and with every open porthole that went underwater, it is estimated that it doubled the size of the damage to the ship. It is possible that these open windows may have caused the ship to sink at double the rate it would have had those windows been closed. Of course, this is not to blame the passengers, however, as this tragedy is certainly not their fault. In our number 8 spot today, we have the brittle fracture. This is another one of those theories behind how the Titanic found itself at the bottom of the North Atlantic. There was an expedition down to the wreckage of the Titanic recently, and it revealed something interesting about the hull of the ship. There were these large pieces of steel that were recovered, each with about 3 rivet holes 1.25 inches in diameter. These pieces revealed that the hull's iron rivets failed to brittle fracture, which is the sudden and rapid snapping. This means that there was a failure in the structural materials, and this usually happens as a result of low temperature, high impact loading, and high sulfur content, all 3 of which were present on the night of the tragedy. The water temperature was below freezing, the Titanic was traveling at a high speed upon impact with the iceberg, and the hull steel contained high levels of sulfur. These chunks of metal gave researchers one of the main answers as to why the Titanic sunk that night. In our number 7 spot today, we have rich remains. When we think of the story of the Titanic, we of course think of the sinking of the ship. We talk about how the survivors were saved, and then of course we think of the catastrophic loss of life. Many people don't stop to ask what happened with all of those who passed away in the tragedy, however. More than 1,500 people passed away in the sinking of the Titanic, and only 337 bodies were pulled from the water. A scholar named Jess Beer has recently examined what was done with those bodies, and throughout this research they have come to realize that whether or not these people got identified and what happened to the remains in the end all depended on their class and economic standing in life. About 1/3 of the recovered bodies ended up being returned to the sea because rescuers didn't think that they would get any sort of life insurance payout from the families of those who had passed and who were of a lower economic standing. For any bodies to be preserved for land burial, the remains had to be easily identifiable, and they needed to have a, quote, economic value even after death with a high social or economic worth. In our number 6 spot today, we have the unidentified passenger. Until about 10 years ago, there were human remains that were recovered from the Titanic sinking that were unidentified despite researchers' best efforts. Initially, there was one identity that they thought they could link the body to, but there were also 5 other identities on the table, and no one was sure how to confirm who this person really was. A little over a decade ago, however, using mitochondrial DNA testing, the re-examining of the DNA gave a 98.87% certainty the unknown person was in fact a passenger named Sidney Goodwin. A man named Ryan Parr is heavily credited with helping bring this mystery to a close, although he insists it couldn't have been done without the help of numerous researchers and scientists who also worked to reveal this passenger's true identity. In our number 5 spot today, we have family ties. Lorraine Allison was just 2 years old when she boarded the Titanic with her family, her parents, and her brother. At the time of the sinking, it is said that Lorraine's brother was rushed to a lifeboat, but that the other 3 members of the family had passed in the tragedy. Despite this, only Lorraine's father's body was found, which led to the question of what happened to Lorraine and her mother. 28 years later, a woman named Helen Kramer came forward and said that she, in fact, was the missing Lorraine. Of course, people were skeptical and weren't willing to believe this, but until her death in 1992, Helen continued to claim that she was, in fact, Lorraine. After her passing, her granddaughter, Debrina Woods, resurfaced the claims by saying that she had inherited more evidence from her grandmother and that the truth should be told. Finally, a group of Titanic researchers with the power of modern science decided that they all wanted to solve this mystery once and for all. They did this by convincing descendants from each family to take a DNA test, and once this was done, they were able to prove that there was no relationship between the two. They were finally able to put this long disputed claim to rest officially. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Telegraph. So you know how people often explain that perhaps many more people would have been saved from the Titanic wreck if the nearby SS Californian had their telegraph operator awake when the distress call was sent? For the man who went to sleep, that's a heavy burden to bear for the rest of your life, but a recent study suggests that even if he was awake, there likely wouldn't have been anything that he could have done. Firstly, there wasn't any rule stating that this guy needed to be awake for 24 hours to man the telegraph machine, so right here, he's off the hook. This study, however, suggests that even if he was awake and the ship received the distress call, the ice around the Titanic was so thick they likely wouldn't have been able to get through to save the passengers either way. Turns out that this disaster really just had the perfect recipe for tragedy. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Titanic radio. This is a piece of the ship that has not yet been recovered, but it's the focus of much debate on whether or not it should be retrieved from the wreckage. Known in 1912 as the Marconi wireless telegraph machine, the radio on the Titanic sent distress calls to nearby ships that ended up saving the lives of 700 people in lifeboats. Despite how many people died in the Titanic tragedy, there were debates about whether or not to retrieve the artifact because of the fact that there might still be remains located in the same area as the radio is. Lawyers have argued against the recovery of the radio because the dive plan did not include the prospect of there being human remains located down there. It also was argued because in order to retrieve it, they would need to cut into the ship's radio compartment, which was strongly opposed by preservation advocates. As of right now, it does appear as though the dive to retrieve the radio will still occur, but of course the pandemic delayed things quite a bit, so at this point it isn't exactly clear when. This radio would be a very valuable artifact, but it also would hold an eerie tale of exactly when and how the radio was used during the final moments of the Titanic. In our number 2 spot today, we have the inspection card. This inspection card once belonged to a woman named Marion Meanwell. What could possibly be worrisome about an inspection card? Well, it shows how Marion was not intended to be on the Titanic, but by some turn of events, she unfortunately found herself as one of the passengers. The card shows that she was originally meant to be traveling on a ship called the Majestic. For some reason, the trip she originally had planned was delayed, and she instead was assigned to the ill-fated Titanic. You can see that the word Majestic was crossed out on her card, which shows us the change in plans. If only people were able to see what was about to strike and they could have warned her. If Marion's body was ever recovered, unfortunately, she has never been identified. In our number 1 spot today, we have the bell. The bell from the crow's nest of the Titanic was recovered from the wreckage and returned to land, where it now resides in the Titanic Museum. The eerie story behind this bell is that it would have been the one that was rung 3 times by the lookout Frederick Fleet in order to attempt to warn of the iceberg that was ahead. Frederick, as well as the other lookout who was with him, Reginald Lee, both ended up thankfully surviving the incident and went on to later explain what happened from their point of view. They explained that if they had been given binoculars to assist with their job, they could have seen the iceberg sooner. When asked how much sooner,
more kicks of flavor, more smiling snackers, more to love. Tyson.
Frederick replied, quote, "Well, enough to get out of the way."
At number 10, we have an octopus nursery. Eight-legged alien-looking things
scenario
with
on
suction
American
cups all over their
soil,
arms and
territory,
beaks for mouths. Octopuses are creepy-looking
it's
things, and to
speculation
top it all off, they can
it's up for
camouflage like a Navy SEAL, and they are
what's it
super
called?
smart. If these are the kind of things that
Collusion.
make your skin crawl, then just running into
words
one
of
of
man,
these
some
guys would
collusion.
probably freak you out. Well, on the underwater expedition at the Davidson Seamount, there was a
rather shocking discovery. They had a remote probe that was on the ocean floor around 10,000 feet, and they came across which seemed to be an octopus that was next to not just one, not just two, but a group of 1,000 octopuses in a nursery. They were all there laying their eggs and using the heat from the volcanic vent to keep them warm. I would hate to be the guy who accidentally steps into that crack and then gets devoured by thousands of sticky arms. But if you're at 10,000 feet underwater, you probably are already screwed. At number 9, we have the Siberian lake monster. Of course, if we're doing a list of scary things that live underwater, we have to throw a giant mysterious sea monster on here. What separates the Siberian lake monster from other more popular guys that we have seen like Loch Ness and that kind of stuff is that underwater scans have actually picked this guy up. This thing is deep in Lake Lavington, and some radar has shown that it looks like a 33-foot long creature is living there. Now this is probably just a skeleton, but if this thing is dead, it means that there was once a giant man-eating monster in this lake. I thought we were supposed to be safe in freshwater. They've nicknamed this thing the Devil, so you know he's a good time and loves company. So next time you go up to the cottage and you're swimming in the water and you feel safe, remember there might be a giant monster lurking underneath the water, ready to turn you into a side dish. At number 8, we have the Blue Hole. Now there are several blue holes in the world. There's one in Belize, there's one in the Red Sea, there's a giant one in my heart that was left there from when Reboot ended on a cliffhanger. How are you going to end a show that so many people fell in love with on a cliffhanger? I will never trust again. Well, this one is between Cape Verde and the Caribbean islands. Scientists are really confused about this thing. It's a crack in the bottom of the ocean floor and it's several thousand miles long. What's strange about this is there's no explanation of how this happened. It might have been tectonic plates moving around, but when this happened, the Earth will probably start to repair itself and there's been no sign of this. My theory is this is where Godzilla goes to sleep at night. I mean, it seems like the most logical answer. It's either that or the gateway to hell. Like, come on guys, I'm doing real science work here. At number 7, we have the Yonaguni Complex. This was discovered by scuba divers in the 1980s. I think that's the scariest part about this one. Could you imagine going scuba diving back in the 80s? The technology back then must have been a tube going up to some guy who would blast fresh air down to you using a bicycle pump. I don't even think they had decompression sickness figured out back then. The chances of you coming up the bends was probably super high. Well, if it wasn't for a few divers in Japan who were willing to sacrifice it all to look at some cool stuff, we wouldn't know anything about the Yonaguni Complex. It's still a mystery as to what this thing is. It looks like some temples that might have existed thousands of years ago, but when the ice age decided to melt, it would have covered this entire area. This could be why an entire civilization got plunged underwater. Or the temple could have been on a cliff, and then when a massive earthquake hit, it knocked the temple into the water. But like everything in life, there are some haters who say this whole thing is just a natural rock formation. Some people just want to ruin everything. At number 6, we have Anacorra Cista Twista. One of the reasons why the underwater world is such a mystery is because we find things like this in there. Sure, there are beautiful things down there like bright fish and chubby marine mammals, but there's also the unknown, unidentified organisms like Anacorra Cista Twista, which should be the name of an 80s hair metal band. But what is this thing? Well, it's a protist. And what is a protist, you may ask? Well, it's an organism that doesn't belong to any animal group, fungus, or plant group. What does that mean? I really have no idea, you guys. I think it means it could be an alien. Some alien came down to Earth for a swim and then scraped its knee on some coral, and now we have alien creatures running around the ocean, probably waiting for you to pee so it can swim up your pee hole and then work its way into your brain. It's really the only logical answer. At number 5, we have the Bimini Road. How were the pyramids made? Was it aliens coming down to share their technology and secrets with us, or was it just thousands upon thousands of slaves who sacrificed their lives and their spines to build them? Well, we don't know and we may never know, but the Bimini Road is another one of these mysteries. It's off the coast of the Bahamas, and it looks like it could have been a pathway that was placed perfectly with giant slabs of rock. Similar to the way the pyramids were made, it seems that these large slabs of rock were too large to be moved by man, and also like the pyramids, these giant slabs were also perfectly placed so well. So where does everyone's mind go when something like this happens? Well, magic or aliens. The logical answer is that this is a natural phenomenon of the water moving and hitting the rocks to make these formations, but people think that this was made using advanced technology from aliens and could have been the road to Atlantis. Honestly, I like the Atlantis theory much better. It's more fun. At number 4, we have colossal squid. Yeah, this thing is a big no thanks for me. So everyone always talks about how there might be sea monsters out there, but this thing actually exists. There's never been one caught alive, but several have washed onto shores dead, and they are massive. The largest one ever discovered was 45 feet long, and it was dead. So you know there was an even bigger one out there that killed this guy. They don't even have suckers on their tentacles. They have hooks. Let me say that again. This squid has 10 giant arms covered in hooks. This thing is straight out of a horror movie. Scientists aren't even sure what something this big eats. They think it probably feeds on whales or your deepest, darkest fears. I wouldn't be surprised if the colossal squid works part-time as a gatekeeper for hell. It makes me think that the old Greek stories about the Kraken might have been real. At number 3, we have underwater circles. Giant formations of circles that are formed underwater, and nobody knows how they got there. These mysteries were discovered off the coast of North Carolina, Florida, and Belize. Now, what are they? Like many things on this list, myself and the entire scientific community have no idea. But here are some theories. Maybe they were formed naturally by either two things, water currents or some sort of animal mating ritual. Another idea is that these things were made by ancient civilizations before the Ice Age. All these things would have been above ground and might have been art left over by some old-timey tribes. And the third theory is that they look kind of like a bullseye, so it might be some sort of nuclear missile target, and if you hit it hard enough, the explosion will cause some sort of major natural disaster, like an earthquake or tsunami, or if we're lucky, both. At number 2, we have Megalodon. If you have a fear of sharks, you're gonna love this one. Megalodon was a prehistoric shark that was even bigger than the giant hooked tentacle beast that was earlier on this list. If you've already forgotten about the colossal squid, it clocked in at around 45 feet long, where Megalodon was closer to 60 feet long. It was a 60-foot shark that could probably rip a blue whale in half in one bite. Well, maybe not that, but it was still a gargantuan creature with teeth the size of Brock Lesnar's fists. This thing wouldn't even chew you. It would just swallow you whole and then fart your skeleton out into the dark, cold ocean. At number 1 on our list, we have Giant Eyeball. A mysterious giant eyeball washed onto the shore of a Florida beach back in October of 2012. I don't know any other kind of giant eyeball other than a mysterious one. There's no super common regular giant eyeball just lying around. But this is also Florida. This is the state where people smoke crack at weddings and kiss alligators on the lips. So maybe it's a little more common over there. Well, this giant eyeball was found by Gino Cavacci, and he didn't know what the hell to make of it, so he took it home and then stuck it in his freezer. Then he called the cops, and the cops came in and told him, "We don't do giant eyeballs on the beach. You have to call the wildlife people." And then he called the wildlife people, and they were like, "What the hell is that?" And he was like, "I don't know. I brought it to you guys to try and figure out what it is." And then some people were like, "Maybe it's a sea monster." And other people were like, "No, it's probably from a marlin." And I think in the end, no one really knew what the hell it was. But just so you know, there's giant eyeballs out there just laying around the beach sometime.
Number 10, Haunted Takeaway. This story comes from a cafe in Hong Kong that did a lot of delivery orders to customers' homes. One day they received an order for 4 meals and they brought it to the address they were given. The customer only opened the door a crack, sliding the money through and telling them to leave the food on the floor. When they checked the register that night, they discovered the money they were given had turned into hell money, which locals use to burn for use in the afterlife. This happened a few more days in a row, every time going to the same home and the money turning into hell money. Each time the customer would never fully open the door or reveal themselves.
Make sure to
Finally,
follow.
the owner decided to report it to the police, and when they entered the apartment, they discovered that the residents weren't actually alive, instead finding 4 dead bodies on the floor. They were able to tell that the bodies had been dead for a significant amount of time, but still had food in their stomachs from the cafe that was only recently digested. Number 9, Sea Monster. In 2018, tourists on a beach in Vietnam were shocked by an apparent sea monster that had washed up on shore. One person filming it and uploading it to YouTube for more people to see. The creature is incredibly strange looking, and to me it looks like a bundle of alien twigs or something. The tour guide themselves admitted that they had no idea if it was an animal, a plant, or even something alien. A lot of commenters believe that this was some sort of mysterious alien creature found on Earth, as no one had ever seen anything like it before. Many people speculating that it might be only in its early stages of development and could grow into something bigger and scarier. As it turns out, it's apparently just some sort of scary deep-sea starfish, and they ended up returning it to the water. And I will honestly never get over how terrifying and alien-looking some deep-sea creatures are. Number 8, Seven Sisters Rock.
This one is another one that comes from Hong Kong, and it's the story behind the Seven Sisters Road. The story goes that there was a group of 7 women who lived near the area, and together they took a vow of celibacy, which means never getting married or ever being physically intimate with someone. Through their pact, they became blood sisters. However, the third sister's family refused to go along with this and organized for her to be married off, preparing the ceremony. Because of their pact, the night before the wedding ceremony took place, all 7 women drowned themselves in the river. The villagers in the area were never able to find their bodies, but the next time the tide receded, they discovered 7 large boulders all in a row. As a result, they were named the Seven Sisters Rocks. Years later, a swimming space was built called the Seven Sisters Swimming Shed, but any late-night male swimmers there would end up drowning mysteriously, the Seven Sisters reportedly haunting the space. Number 7, Haunted Tomb. Before I start this one, I am just gonna say yes, Israel is in Asia, and yes, I did have to Google that. Go easy on me, it's been a while since I last took a geography class. A group of researchers were doing excavations in an old cemetery in Israel when they discovered an ancient tomb. What shocked them the most, however, was the grave marker for a man named Jacob the Convert, who died around 1800 years ago. The inscription on the grave was written in human blood and was a warning that nobody should ever open the tomb, stating that anyone who does so would be cursed. What type of curse isn't detailed, but curses are typically never a good thing. The people who found it walled off the area with stones and halted their excavations. Getting cursed probably wasn't in their contract. Number 6, cursed balls. More cursed things from Israel. Let's take a look at this pair of cursed balls. And yes, I did pick this one because I think it's funny to say cursed balls. During excavation near the Israel border, archaeologists discovered these 2 ballista balls, which were basically ammunition for a big crossbow that fires rocks. A few years later, the balls went missing from the site, but unfortunately, nobody actually noticed. 20 years later, the balls were returned and found on the site once again, along with a note. The thief who stole them apparently had bad luck and believed that the balls were cursed. He said that when he brought the balls home, his successful business suddenly failed, his family abandoned him, he went into severe debt, and apparently many other issues. He didn't realize until it was too late that his bad luck was caused by a bunch of bad balls. So he returned the balls to the site, and we can only assume that his bad luck ended. Number 5, Ganjiam Asylum. Now let's swerve into a few buildings that were discovered to be apparently haunted. The first is Ganjiam Psychiatric Hospital in South Korea, touted as the most haunted place in the country. It was opened in 1982 but closed only 14 years later in 1996, being left empty and abandoned. The story goes that many of the patients at the hospital were disappearing mysteriously, people believing that the owner of the hospital was actually keeping them hostage there and treating them poorly, running away to America when the families and authorities started looking into it. The doctors there apparently became just as insane as the patients, and due to their tragic deaths and unfinished business, the angry spirits of the doctors and patients now haunt the broken down facility. Many urban explorers and ghost hunters report large amounts of paranormal activity and seeing apparitions of the patients within the halls. Number 4, Prince Gong's Mansion. Over in China, one of their most haunted locations is Prince Gong's Mansion, owned by an official of the Qing dynasty who was known to be incredibly corrupt. He lived there with his wife and his harem of around 80 ladies. One of his only redeeming factors was said to be his devotion to his wife. When she became incredibly sick after their son passed away, he did everything to try and figure out a way to cure her, including hiring monks to pray for her health. Unfortunately, they apparently discovered that she was dying of a broken heart, and this was unable to be cured by any method. So unfortunately, the woman would soon pass away. The mansion is now said to be haunted by her spirit, as well as other women that the prince was involved with. Most of the reports say that you can hear his wife crying late at night, and security guards have reported seeing apparitions of women in white dresses wandering through the halls. Number 3, Soccer Team. This one was probably one of the most talked about news stories at the time, even worldwide, and you'll probably remember it once I start talking about it. Back in 2018, a group of British divers were in northern Thailand when they discovered an entire soccer team flooded and trapped over 2 miles inside of a cave. The soccer team had been led to the cave by their coach, who had visited there before. It was supposed to be only a quick expedition lasting around 2 hours, so they brought only flashlights, rope, and batteries, not any food or water. But when a monsoon hit, they became trapped inside, and 2 hours turned into 2 weeks, surviving off water dripping from a stalactite and chanting mantras in order to stay calm. Fortunately, all 12 players were rescued over the course of 3 days and survived, only one rescue team member losing their life in the effort. Number 2, airplane graveyard. One place to visit in Thailand that many people probably don't know about is this airplane graveyard. Starting in January of 2010, large scrapped airplanes just suddenly started showing up on a chunk of private property next to an auto body shop in Bangkok. In 5 years, many large planes were added to the graveyard, and soon after, it was discovered that 3 separate families had taken up residence within the planes. The planes are clearly broken down and have been stripped for their parts, making the site look like the eerie location of like a giant multiple plane crash. The families that live there use the planes as a source of income, taking the parts to be sold and making money off tourists who come to visit. Some of the planes include 2 Boeing 747s and 2 MD-82 jetliners. Gaining access to the property will run you around $5, so if you're in Thailand and interested in planes, maybe consider checking it out. Number 1, hybrid creature. And we are continuing to stay in Thailand for this final entry on the list, which is a strange creature found in a remote village that had people absolutely baffled. Footage of the creature shows it laid out on a table surrounded by people. It appears to be a young buffalo, but it has the skin and scales of a crocodile. Many people believing that a crocodile and buffalo somehow fell in love and created this hybrid creature, which died shortly after it was born, which is a pretty common occurrence for hybrid animals. The buffalo had previously birthed plenty of normal calves before, so they didn't think it could have been just some passed down genetic trait, truly believing it must be mixed with a crocodile. The villagers had it laid out on the table because they believed that the creature would bring them good luck. Whether or not it actually did, I'm not sure, and other people online believe that the whole thing was just a hoax.
Starting off this countdown, we have David Fravor. David Fravor is a U.S. Navy commander who spoke about some pretty terrifying things that he encountered underwater while working for the Navy. So according to him, twice while recovering spent practice munitions out of the water, he spotted a weird underwater object. The first time, he saw a dark mass underwater. He described it as being a big mass that was kind of circular. He said he was certain that it wasn't a submarine. For the second sighting, he was retrieving a practice torpedo when this same weird thing sucked it down into the depths of the ocean. The torpedo was never seen again. So what was this big mass that he was seeing? In our 9th spot, we have the naval report. After hearing David's interview, a 79-year-old woman contacted him. She said that her father was a naval officer, and when she was a child, her father showed her a telegram that stated that unidentified objects had been sighted going in and out of the water at one of their locations. The woman's father told her, and I quote, "We get these all the time, and it's always in the same area." But obviously, the Navy isn't going to release this information to the public. In our 8th spot today, we have the Sycamore Knoll. This is a weird underwater structure located close to Malibu. No one knows what it is, but it looks like a weird stadium-shaped structure, and it's located about 2,000 feet underwater. It's also massive. It's about 2.5 to 3 miles wide. It also has what appears to be pillars or columns supporting it up, and under there it looks like an entrance. One theory is that it's an underwater alien base. Crazy, I know, but a number of UFO sightings have been reported for years in that area. Some even claim to see UFOs landing in the waters in that exact area, and this was before the underwater structure was even discovered. Freaky, isn't it? What do you think it is, though? Let me know in the comments below. In our 7th spot today, we had the unidentified object. Now, in case you were unaware, there's this whole theory that aliens live in underwater bases, and that's why a number of UFO sightings are by lakes. lakes, or people have seen these saucers rise up or into the lakes. Well, in 1970, biologist Ivan Sanderson published a book titled The Invisible Residents. In this book, he talked all about UFOs or USOs, unidentified submerged objects, aka UFOs that have been spotted going into the water or rising up out of it. According to this book, on April 19th, 1957, a crew member on board a Japanese fishing boat witnessed something very strange. He saw two metallic silvery objects descend from the sky and dive right down into the sea. He described them as being 10 meters long with no wings or anything. When the craft hit the water, it caused great waves and rocked their boat tremendously. So maybe the whole UFO, USO theory is true and they're living underwater. Who knows? In our sixth spot today, we have the gold. Did you know that $771 trillion worth of gold lies hidden in the ocean? Yes, you heard me. Wouldn't it be nice to just be swimming along and bump into some gold and become a millionaire? Unfortunately, it's not that easy. Ocean waters around the world contain about 20 million tons of gold in them. Each liter of water would contain approximately 13 billionths of a gram of gold. So you need to collect and filter an awful lot before becoming rich. And currently, there's no cost-effective method to remove the gold from seawater and be profitable. Now, people have tried. None have been successful. One case that I want to talk about has to do with a man named Ford Jerrigan. He came up with a plan for a gold accumulator. The plan was to extract gold from the Long Island Sound using a process involving mercury and electricity treatments. In fact, people thought that it was great, and before he knew it, he had investors, and he raised about $1 million for this project. But in the end, he scammed them all and fled with the money. We are now at our fifth and halfway mark with the giant sea monster. Now, if you watch my video on Google Earth, then you already have seen me talk about this. If you haven't, then, well, Google Earth basically caught a giant sea beast on their satellite camera. It was spotted off the coast of Antarctica's Deception Island. And no one, even scientists, don't know what it is. It could just be a whale, but it's still unconfirmed. Theories range from it being an underwater UFO to a kraken or another sea beast that we have yet to discover. To be honest, to me, it looks like a massive squid, but what do you think it is? Let me know in the comments below. In our fourth spot, we have the UFO video. More UFOs. Now, this was a leaked video showing what appears to be a UFO diving into the ocean. The video was filmed in 2019 off the coast of San Diego. Eventually, people were demanding answers, so the Pentagon eventually came forward saying that the video was authentic and that they don't know what the object is in the video. In the video, the object flies across the screen before stopping and slowly lowering itself into the water. Apparently, this was recorded by official Navy personnel. What do you think that could be? The Pentagon has no explanation for it yet. In our third spot today, we have the plastic. The amount of plastic currently in our oceans is disgusting. Currently, 5.25 trillion macro and micro pieces of plastic are in our ocean. There's 46,000 pieces in every square mile of the ocean. Every day, around 8 million pieces of plastic make their way into our oceans. And guess what? Fish are eating them, and then we're eating these fish. So slowly, these microplastics are ending up in our bodies. But not just from fish. From bottled water, beer, honey, sea salt, and tea bags have all been exposed as microplastic carriers. We're killing marine life and ourselves, slowly but surely, and the governments are hardly addressing this issue. In our second spot, we have the nuclear waste. Bet you didn't know this, but our oceans are radioactive. Since 1952, low levels of radioactive waste have been discharged into the Irish Sea, the English Channel, and the Arctic Ocean. This radiation can enter the food chain through plankton, and then the fish eat the plankton, and then we eat the fish. In fact, radioactive cesium and plutonium have already been found in seals and porpoises, and it's getting worse. As the nuclear energy industry grows, more and more radioactive waste will be disposed of and find its way into our ground and water supply. Again, another scary thing the government doesn't address. And in our number one spot today, we have the secret underwater bases. Allegedly, the government has a number of secret underwater bases. They're just hidden from the public, so we don't know about them. We do know of one base, though, and that's the Naval Testing Facility in Lake Bayview, Idaho. The lake that it's located in is 1,200 feet deep, and it is pretty remote, so it's deep and secluded enough to run these tests. If they have one there, who's to say they don't have more and in the ocean? Only time will tell.
Number 10. Abandoned car. A desert park ranger on Reddit shared a few of their stories that they had experienced while working. One that stands out is their discovery of a burned and abandoned car. When they received the report, they weren't too shocked, as it wasn't a rare occurrence that cars would be stolen and abandoned, occasionally being burned. When they found the vehicle, and as they waited for the fire department to arrive, they were left standing in shock, as it was clear that there was a body left in the front seat of the car. They discovered rope and other strange items in the car, and it was determined that the body had been tied up and killed. The police arrived, but no answers ever came about what had happened there, and they now refer to the area as the haunted site. Number 9, abandoned sites. It's not uncommon to find abandoned campsites in the woods, but these rangers share their stories of the unique, strange, and scary things they found that made them stand out. The first was an abandoned house with a small shed hidden behind it. The shed had a large steel door which had been broken off its hinges when they found it. The windows had been boarded over and covered up, but venturing inside, they found only a queen-sized bed covered with burned sheets. The next was an abandoned tent found very close to the walking trail. Inside was a large stash of food like beans and rice, a sleeping bag, and a lonely teddy bear. Sometimes the stories with the least information and answers are scariest, as they allow our minds to wander and imagine various frightening scenarios. Number 8. Search returns strange evidence. A ranger and their coworker were called to head out and search for a group of teen hikers that had become separated from their group. They spent most of their day heading in the direction of where the teenagers had last been seen. Eventually, deep into the woods and their journey, they came across a startling discovery. They found branches which had been carved into spears placed into the ground, unidentifiable carvings in trees, children's stuffed toys hanging from ropes tied to the trees. One thing they noticed was that the symbols in the trees appeared to be freshly carved. As would be expected, the two were spooked, but settled down nearby as night was coming and they had to sleep. In the morning, they discovered shoe prints and a piece of fabric that had become caught on a tree. Someone had been there in the night. The teens were later discovered, and the two workers returned back to base, never knowing who had been in the woods with them that night. Number 7, strange creature. A camp counselor in New York made a scary discovery when he was sneaking out late at night to meet up with his girlfriend. It was about 1 a.m. when he heard rustling in the woods next to him, expecting to be faced with something like a bear, deer, or other wild animal. Unexpectedly, a creature burst forth from the bushes towards him. In the darkness, he described the creature's appearance as being 3 feet tall, standing on 2 legs, and having 2 arms, looking like a miniature person. While it can be easy to misidentify animals in the dark of night, I personally can't think of any normal forest creature that would match anything close to this description. He then moved towards it and it apparently got scared, running away in a strange manner that the camp counselor described as being similar to doing the robot dance. To this day, he has no idea what the creature might have been. Number 6, light on the cliff. An unfortunate part of being a park ranger is having to go on search and rescue missions for missing people, and never knowing what state you might find them in, if at all. One park ranger recounts a story of him and his coworker on one of these calls, searching for a man in his 20s who had gone missing. As they spent the day searching with no luck, they decided to set up a camp and rest for the night. At about 2 a.m., he got up to go to the bathroom when he spotted a bright light moving on a cliff a few miles away, saying it looked to be like a flashlight beam. In the morning, they went to search that area and unfortunately found the missing man's body at the base of the cliff. What caught the ranger's attention was a flashlight, similar to the one he thought he had seen on the cliff. So it seems to make sense. The man had been walking with his